Reviewers note that the GR's new setup delivers a marked improvement in both ride comfort and road holding on challenging gravel roads. Cars.co.za. In extended drives, testers said occupants were comfortable, and the vehicle handled open road and mild off-road terrain well. Double apex. However, because of the sport tuning, on very bad or broken roads the ride might feel firmer/harsher than a more softly tuned version. Auto. +1. The storm eased by morning, but the cold deepened until every breath scraped his throat raw, and the trucks creaked like dying animals. Walt Raines sat on the frozen bumper of his vehicle, hands black with grease and frost, watching the men move stiffly around the convoy as the pale light broke through the clouds. They were camped in a hollow near a cluster of ruined trees, the road half buried under a drift that had swallowed the last 2 trucks overnight. The engines ticked as they cooled, faint metallic pops that sounded like bones cracking. He rubbed his hands together and stared at the gray line of smoke that hung above the forest where artillery had fallen during the night. Somewhere out there, the front still burned. He tried not to think about how close they were to running dry. A corporal approached with a clipboard, his face raw from windburn. "Captain says we stay put until visibility clears," he muttered, eyes down. "He wants an inspection on all engines before we move again. Says he doesn't want another breakdown like last night." Raines laughed under his breath, a sound that had no humor in it. "Tell the captain the manual doesn't melt ice," he said, standing up and brushing snow from his sleeves. The corporal hesitated, then walked off, boots crunching hard. Raines glanced toward the command truck parked up the hill. The canvas flaps were drawn, but he could see figures moving inside, their breath fogging the windows. Officers making plans on maps that no longer matched the ground. He started toward them, his boots sinking ankle-deep in the drift, each step slow and deliberate. Inside the command tent, the air smelled of kerosene and damp wool. Captain Lyle stood over a table littered with maps and half-empty coffee mugs, his gloved finger tracing a road line that no longer existed. When Raines stepped inside, the captain didn't look up. "I heard about your stunt," he said flatly. "Mixing that stuff into government fuel. You could have blown the whole convoy sky high." Raines took off his cap and rubbed his forehead. "We'd be dead in that ditch if I hadn't." Lyle finally raised his eyes, pale and rimmed red from sleeplessness. "Regulations exist for a reason, Sergeant. You're not here to improvise. You're here to follow procedure." Raines met his gaze. "Procedure froze solid around 2 in the morning, sir." The captain's jaw tightened. For a moment the only sound was the faint patter of melting snow against the canvas roof. Then Lyle turned away, his voice lower but sharper. "You pull another stunt like that, and I'll have you on charges the minute we hit division lines." Raines nodded once, expression blank, then stepped back out into the cold. The wind cut through him like wire. He stood there for a moment, staring at the trees. The horizon was a blur of white and smoke, and somewhere beyond that lay the tanks waiting for their fuel. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering wildly before catching. The smoke stung his throat, but it steadied his hands. Behind him, the men were working quietly, checking tires, clearing exhausts, tightening canvas straps. They trusted him more than they trusted command now, though none of them said it aloud. He could see it in the way they looked at him when a truck sputtered, in the way they waited for his nod before trying anything new. He walked among them, offering short instructions, keeping his voice low. The air was so cold the words seemed to freeze as they left his mouth. At one of the rear trucks, a private was hammering at a fuel cap that had seized shut. Raines crouched beside him, examining the frost buildup. "You'll crack it if you keep that up," he said. The private looked at him helplessly. "It won't budge, Sarge. Even with the wrench." Raines took the tool and set it aside. He pulled out his lighter again and held the flame near the seal, rotating it slowly until a faint hiss escaped and the metal shifted. "Heat loosens what force only breaks," he said quietly, more to himself than the kid. The cap turned. The private stared at him like he'd just seen sorcery. Raines patted his shoulder and moved on. Hours passed that way, small repairs, small victories. By noon the sky cleared enough for a thin light to reach the valley. The snow glittered like glass dust. The convoy started engines one by one, a staggered growl that rose and fell across the hollow. Rains listened to each sound carefully, noting the rhythm, the tone, the tremor that warned of strain. He moved from truck to truck, feeling hoods, sniffing exhaust. His mind worked like an instrument tuned to metal and fuel. Then he heard it, the uneven clatter of his modified truck, burning hotter than it should. He frowned, lifted the hood, and studied the pipes. The mixture he'd used last night was corrosive, dangerous. One wrong balance, and it could seize the pistons for good. He stared at the patchwork of metal and frost, the black scorch marks along the intake. The sound was alive but angry, like an animal forced to run too long. He felt the weight of it, the risk he'd created. Somewhere behind him the captain's voice barked orders to move out. Rains replaced the hood and climbed into the cab. The steering wheel was stiff, the seat cold enough to numb his legs. He glanced at the photograph taped to the dashboard, a faded picture of his old garage back home, sunlight slanting through open doors, a younger version of himself laughing with his brother beside a rusted pickup. For a second the memory seemed to warm him, then it was gone. He started the engine, and the convoy rolled. The road ahead wound through a stretch of open ground, where the snow gave way to churned mud and frozen ruts. The sun hovered weakly through the haze, a pale coin in a dead sky. They drove in silence except for the drone of engines and the clatter of chains on tires. Every so often a distant explosion rippled across the horizon. Each man kept his eyes forward. The world felt suspended between motion and ruin. As they approached a crossroads, a scout on a jeep raised his hand. Rain slowed, heart thudding. Up ahead, a burned-out German half-track blocked half the road. Steam rose from its carcass. Blackened helmets lay scattered like stones. The captain signaled for a halt. Rains climbed out, scanning the treeline. The air was too still. The silence too heavy. He walked toward the wreck, snow crunching under his boots. The smell hit first, burnt rubber, oil, and something worse underneath. He peered inside and saw the bodies frozen where they'd died. He backed away slowly, eyes sweeping the forest. Movement flickered among the pines, a flash of gray cloth, then gone. He raised his hand and pointed, and rifles came up all along the convoy. The captain shouted for discipline, but everyone knew it was too late. A burst of gunfire split the air. Snow erupted around them. Men dove for cover, engines revving as drivers panicked. Rains threw himself behind the front wheel of his truck, shouting for the driver to move. Bullets punched through the side panels. The truck roared forward, chains biting into ice, and the convoy surged behind it. German voices shouted from the trees. The ambush broke into chaos. Rains grabbed the wheel and yanked hard, steering the truck through a ditch that tore open the undercarriage. Metal screamed. The engine coughed smoke but kept running. He heard the captain shouting behind him, orders drowned in the roar. When they finally cleared the tree line, the road opened again, and the gunfire faded. The men didn't speak. The trucks rolled on, engines howling, smoke trailing like ghosts. Rains stared straight ahead, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. The snow returned, softer now, falling over the bullet holes and frozen bodies left behind. He reached for the radio, hesitated, then let it drop. There was nothing to say. He drove until the trees thinned and the horizon widened, a gray plain stretching toward the unseen front. The wind whistled through a crack in the glass, sharp as breath through teeth. He looked at the sky, heavy and low, and thought of how close they had come to ending here. He could still feel the heat of the engine beneath his feet, the unnatural fire of his own making. For the first time he wondered if he'd gone too far, if the line between defiance and madness was already behind him. The thought stayed with him as the convoy vanished into the white distance, the trucks groaning like tired beasts that did not yet know whether they were escaping or circling back toward their own destruction. The next night came without stars. The sky hung low and dark, the clouds pressed close to the frozen earth as if the world itself were shrinking. The convoy had crawled for hours through narrow backroads that twisted between pine ridges and frozen streams, every turn a gamble between progress and a dead end. Walt Raines could feel the weight of exhaustion in every bone. His fingers no longer obeyed without thought, they trembled when he tried to tighten a bolt or strike a match. The trucks stank of fuel and sweat, and the men inside moved like ghosts, half dreaming, half dying. They had lost 2 vehicles to the ambush, 3 men wounded, 1 gone for good. No one spoke about him. They couldn't afford to. The living still had fuel to deliver, and time was burning faster than gasoline. When the engines began to choke again, Rains knew they were reaching the limit. The modified mixture that had saved them was eating through the filters and valves. He could smell it, a faint metallic tang like blood on hot iron. They pulled into a clearing at the base of a hill, the wind curling through the trees with a sound like distant voices. The captain called for a halt. Men stumbled out of their trucks and collapsed against the tires, their faces pale under the weak glow of the headlights. Rains climbed down and stretched, the cold biting deep into his lungs. He stared at the sky and saw nothing but black. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the tick of cooling metal. He walked toward the lead truck, crouched and listened. The rhythm of the engine was off, too fast, too shallow. The timing chain was starting to slip. He could rebuild it maybe, but not here, not with frost biting his tools and enemy patrols in the woods. He ran a gloved hand over the hood, feeling the vibration of life slipping away. The captain approached, his breath steaming in the dark. "How bad?" he asked. Rains didn't look up. "We're burning the engines out, sir. Another day, maybe 2. Then we're done." Lyle stood in silence for a long moment. The sound of wind filled the gap between them. "If we stop, we die," he said finally. "You find a way to make them run." He turned and walked off before Rains could answer. Rains spat into the snow, watched it freeze almost instantly. "Sure," he muttered. "I'll just talk to them nicely." He walked back to the supply truck where his small collection of stolen chemicals and spare parts were hidden under a tarp. His hands shook as he uncovered them. He still had a few flasks of the aviation additive left, but he knew using it again would push the engines past safe limits. The stuff burned hot, too hot, but it never froze. He stared at the cloudy liquid inside the bottle, its faint blue shimmer in the lamplight. It was beautiful in a dangerous way, like a storm caught in glass. Behind him, one of the privates called out, "Sergeant, we're freezing our asses off out here." Rains didn't answer. He was thinking, measuring risk against survival, the way a man weighs the worth of his own hand, before cutting it off to save the arm. He poured a small amount into an empty canteen and mixed it with diesel, swirling it until it turned the color of rusted copper. He took a deep breath and unscrewed the truck's fuel cap. The smell that came out was sharp and oily. He poured the mixture in and sealed it tight. The metal groaned as if it disapproved. He stepped back, rubbed his numb fingers together, then nodded to the driver. "Start her up." The man hesitated. "You sure?" Rains gave a short nod. The engine turned once, coughed, then caught. The roar that followed wasn't normal. It was deeper, rougher, like thunder rolling underground. Flames spat briefly from the exhaust before settling into a steady growl. The sound filled the clearing, hot and alive. Rains felt it in his chest, a vibration that rattled through his ribs. "That's new," the driver muttered. Rains crouched, listening. The rhythm was uneven, but powerful. The mixture worked. For now. He stepped back, his breath clouding the air, and looked at the rest of the convoy. The men were watching him again, silent, their faces reflecting the glow of the exhaust like men gathered around a campfire. He felt their hope and their fear mixing in the cold air. "We'll burn through the night," he said finally. "Double shifts. Keep them running or they'll freeze." No one argued. The engines came alive one by one, coughing, sputtering, then roaring like a pack of beasts waking from hibernation. The sound rolled through the forest, echoing off the hills. Snow began to slide from branches, loosened by vibration. The convoy became a moving inferno of headlights and steam. Rains walked alongside the line, checking for leaks, feeling the heat radiating off the hoods. The air shimmered. For the first time in days he felt warmth that wasn't from his own blood. He almost smiled. They moved again just before dawn, tires grinding over ice and mud. The wind had died, leaving the world eerily still. The landscape opened into a wide valley cut by a narrow river. Smoke hung low over the ground, curling from distant shellfire. The sky glowed faintly orange on the horizon. Rains could taste the change in the air. They were close to the front now. Every mile was danger. Every shadow might hold a gun. The lead truck hit a rut and lurched. Rains felt the shudder through the wheel. The modified fuel burned hotter now, pushing the machine harder than it was ever meant to go. He could feel the tension in the metal like a heartbeat. Another few hours of this, and the engine might tear itself apart. He gripped the wheel tighter and pushed forward. They crossed the river at dawn, the bridge half frozen, planks creaking under the weight. The water below was black and fast, chunks of ice floating past like broken glass. One of the trucks slipped, wheels spinning, but the others pushed behind it until it cleared. Rains shouted over the roar, his voice raw. "Keep it steady. Don't stop." The men obeyed without hesitation now. Fear had burned away everything except obedience to survival. When the last truck rolled off the bridge, the captain signaled halt. They gathered on the bank, breath heaving, engines idling. Rains climbed out and walked a few steps toward the edge of the river, staring down at the water. The reflection of the trucks shimmered like firelight on the surface. He crouched, scooped a handful of snow, and rubbed it over his face until the sting made his eyes water. He looked back at the line of vehicles, steam rising from them in thick gray waves. The smell of hot metal filled the air. It wasn't victory yet, but it was movement, and movement meant life. The captain came up beside him, staring at the engines. "You think they'll hold?" he asked. Rains watched a drop of melted snow fall from his glove and hiss against the hot metal. "They'll hold as long as they can," he said quietly. "After that, we'll see." Lyle nodded once and walked away. Rains remained there, hands resting on his knees, feeling the tremor of the ground beneath him. He thought about the fuel sloshing in the tanks, the volatile mixture he had created out of desperation. It was working, but it was unnatural, a fire that ate faster than it gave. He wondered how long before the engines burned themselves empty, or the heat took something more than machines. He stared into the horizon where the faint rumble of artillery pulsed through the air like a heartbeat, steady and distant. For a moment he imagined he could feel the rhythm sync with his own. Then the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and iron, and he understood that whatever miracle he had forced into being tonight would demand a price before dawn. The wind returned before dawn, cutting across the valley like a blade, carrying with it the faint stench of cordite and burnt rubber from distant battles. The convoy moved again under that dead gray sky, engines groaning in unison, exhaust fuming in long ribbons that vanished into the cold. Walt Raines kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Though calling it a road was generous, it was little more than a scar of ice and mud winding between skeletal trees. The trucks slid and lurched, tires spinning, men gripping the sides to keep from being thrown. He could hear their teeth clattering even over the roar of the engines. The heat from the modified fuel gave each machine a strange life, a kind of anger that made them twitch and buck under his hands like wild animals. Every vibration told him something. Pressure building, valves straining, metal close to surrender. He listened as much as he drove. The captain's jeep led the column, a dark shape half swallowed by fog. Beyond it, visibility ended in white nothingness. Rains drove without seeing, guided by instinct, by rhythm, by the belief that forward was the only direction left. Somewhere behind, a truck backfired so loudly it echoed like artillery. He glanced in the mirror and saw men flinch, hands darting to rifles. Everyone was a trigger pull away from panic. The road dipped into a shallow ravine where the snow thickened and muffled all sound except the engines. Then a sharp crack split the silence, a sound he recognized instantly. A rifle! 2 more followed. The convoy slammed to a stop, tires skidding on ice. Men shouted, ducked, scattered behind axles. Raines felt the truck shake as a bullet punched through the side mirror. He slid out, hit the ground, and crawled behind a wheel well. The snow bit his palms. He saw movement in the trees, gray uniforms flickering between trunks. Germans. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. The captain's voice shouted orders, but the storm carried the words away. Someone opened fire from the truck bed, muzzle flash lighting the fog like lightning. Raines could taste cordite and exhaust mixing in the air. The sound of the engines filled the spaces between gunfire, a constant growl that refused to die. He crawled back to the cab, yanked open the door, and slammed his fist against the dashboard. "Move!" he yelled to the driver. "We can't sit here." The man's face was pale, eyes wide. "They'll hit us on the road." Rains grabbed the wheel himself. "They'll hit us worse if we freeze." He jammed the truck into gear and floored the pedal. The tires screamed, throwing up snow and mud, but the modified engine surged, dragging the massive vehicle forward. The others followed, one by one, headlights cutting through the smoke. The convoy turned into a rolling wall of fire and steel, bullets sparking off hoods, shattered glass flying like sleet. Rains ducked low, teeth gritted, eyes on the captain's jeep ahead. German tracers